or you've been suppressing something forever. And then finally it's like, I am going to just unload on you. Like that's a flare up. That's like a bomb going off.
So Candor's like hemorrhoids. They kind of come and go. You get a little flare up. Then they go away. Things are okay.
It's kind of like IBS after you drink all of these margaritas.
There'll be no dairy products in my margarita.
Correct.
Pardon me for interrupting your meeting. Mr. Allen, you remember Fletcher Reed?
Oh, yes. Nice to see you again, Fletcher. By the way, I'll be observing you in court this afternoon. I've been hearing some good things about you.
Well, Fletcher has just been telling me how much he thinks of you. Well, why don't you tell Mr. Allen? Well, what do you think of him?
He's a pedantic, pontificating, pretentious bastard, a belligerent old fart, a worthless, steaming pile of cow dung. Figuratively speaking.
That's the funniest damn thing I've ever heard. You're a real card, Reed. I love a good roast. Do Simmons.
Simmons is old. He should have been out of the game years ago, but he can't stay home because he hates his wife. You've met her at the Christmas parties. She's the one that gets plastered and calls him a retard. And you, Tom, you're the biggest brown nose I've ever seen. You've got your head so far up Mr. Allen's ass, I can't tell where you end and he begins.
Priceless.
You have bad breath caused by gingivitis. You couldn't get a porn star off. Your hairpiece looks like something that was killed crossing the highway. I don't know whether to comb it or scrape it off with a shovel and bury it alive. Loser! Idiot! Wimp! Degenerate! Slut!
I like your style, Reed. That's just what this stubby company needs. A little irreverence.
Good! I'll see you later, dickhead!
Dickhead, priceless. Keep your eye on that boy. Dickhead.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God here.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch.
Oh man, the delayed reaction. Was that a birthday delayed reaction?
I was gonna try and squeeze something in there, but I was like, I'll just stay on brand. Happy birthday, big guy.
Hey, thanks, man.
What better way is it for you to spend your birthday than with me?
In the spirit of being radically candid, I am 45 years old. My feet hurt, my back hurts, my knees hurt. But I'm about the same weight I was in high school, so that's positive. And I am going to lunch in 1 hour, and all I'm going to order are margaritas. So we come hell or high water, fellow listeners. If you all of a sudden hear Ian drop off at the 1 hour moment, it's just Frank talking. It's because I am on my way to a restaurant to meet my wife and a few friends, and we are going to have a boozy lunch.
I think it sounds fabulous. You're halfway to 90.
That's the life of a podcaster. That's what you're listening to.
You're halfway to 90. I think you should celebrate.
Oh, there we go. So an often quoted movie of both Frank and myself is Liar Liar with Jim Carrey from the cold open. It's a fascinating take on a lawyer who cannot tell a lie. Hilarious movie with Jim Carrey, kind of at his peak of his powers. And the story's fascinating because it makes you stop and think, what if I couldn't lie at all for a week? And would I be effective in the office and my job? Would I be effective in my relationships? The truth is, everybody lies a little bit every day. And if you're sitting there listening, saying, that's not true, I'm a good person, I don't lie. I think sometimes being a good person means you lie a little bit, means you withhold a little bit, means you don't overshare everything. And in that movie, he shares every thought that comes into his crazy mind. And it just goes to show that sometimes lying is the polite thing to do. Now, sometimes it's terrible. Sometimes it doesn't get anything done. But there's a little bit of balance. And in talking about this, Frank talked about a book that kind of changed your life a little bit. Do you want to share what book that was?
So I've talked about this before, and I talk about it in other channels, but I hired I paid 50 grand in like 2011 for like a mentor. And it was worthless, like absolutely worthless. It was like, I told Ian about it, and he's like, dude, go get your money back. And like we strategized, I'm like, I'm gonna ride it out. The guy gave me two things of note. He introduced me to Jason Medley, which was great because that's how I found Collective Genius. But the only other thing he did of value is he turned me on to a book called Radical Honesty. And Radical Honesty is a book written by a guy named Brad Blanton, Dr. Brad Blanton. It was written in 1994. It was re-released in 2006. In 2006, when you ordered it, like there was crickets coming out of Amazon. Like it was like, it took forever. It took like 2 or 3 weeks for Amazon to get it to you because it was very lightly printed. We're gonna get into a minute and talk about a different book and compare and contrast it. The thing that was really helpful with me on, it was very philosophical, which most things that Ian and I kind of like are more kind of direct or give bulleted points. This is a philosophical take, but he basically just beats you over the head for 400 pages on, you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not just completely and totally honest about everything. Now, I was raised by a mother who's a school teacher who always wants to please everybody. So for me, this completely radical shift to the other side is something that helped me become more direct and more to the point and stand up for myself in some conversations that we'll talk about today. Now, the other side of it is this guy, if you read the entire book, 300 pages in, he's been divorced a bunch of times, and this was in the 90s. So in 20 something years later, I'm sure he's been divorced more. So the point is, it's a good piece of info to kind of incorporate into another body, your total body of work, but it can't be your only pitch. Because if it is, you're going to be looked at as an asshole, be completely alone, and probably not be married.
And speaking of assholes, there are an entire genre of books, business books, with the word asshole in it. There's Assholes Finish First. There's Assholes, a Field Guide, how to deal with difficult people. There's The Massive Advantage of Dealing with Assholes. Just don't be an asshole, a surprisingly necessary guide to being a good guy. And then, of course, Assholes, a Theory of Donald Trump. So obviously in the lexicon, asshole is wrong, right, or indifferent, a big part of the Amazon bestsellers list. And there's another book outside of Radical Honesty that is more recent. It was written in 2017 by Kim Scott. It's called Radical Candor. Now, this is when Frank initially told me about it, I thought he just got the subject of the book wrong, and he was talking about Radical Candor, because Radical Candor is a very big best-selling, New York Times best-selling business book. It's written more as a field guide for managers, how to be a good boss by being more direct. Whereas I think the book you read, Frank, Radical Honesty, is more of a general life book, kind of a self-help philosophy kind of book.
Very much so. And what's funny is like we both assume the same thing. Well, the other guy's an idiot and he doesn't know he's got the wrong title. So when we finally start going over the agenda, we're like, oh, there's 2 books. Who's the asshole? But the other piece of it that's pretty interesting is I mentioned how hard it is to get the Blanton book. He's an asshole. He's not just honest, he's an asshole. And his book is like, do you have the statistics, Ian, of like what his book is sold?
Yeah. So on Amazon, his book is 1,361st in the self-help philosophy genre, and that's the only place it's ranked. He has 400 rankings, whereas in Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor, is top 5 in 11 different categories, including business, philosophy, self-help. So, and she has over 10 times the number of 5-star ratings in there. So obviously Radical Candor, it's a more recent book, but it's also one that has sold a hell of a lot more copies than Radical Honesty. And we laughed about this a little bit in that she takes a little different approach in that they both use the word radical, which maybe just has a high Q rating. But she includes caring in her process, and she includes a little bit more empathy, a little bit more emotional intelligence in her process because she's writing as a field guide for managers. Whereas in Blanton is just a very direct, in your face. And it kind of makes sense to me, Frank, with a name like Blanton, which is a whiskey name. That's kind of how I am on whiskey. If I've drank enough whiskey, you are going to get some radical honesty out of me every time with zero
Maybe
caring.
some fruit throwing, maybe.
Zero caring, zero emotional intelligence.
Perhaps telling off a cab driver.
You want to know how Ian feels, you give him 7 or 8 Jack and Cokes. What he's thinking, he's going to tell you a piece of his mind. There's no doubt. So the 2 different books, in our outline in preparing this, we took a little bit from all of it, and we're going to try to share at least what our takes are on it. I think in general, Frank, I would say that there's a spectrum. There's 0 to 10 on directness and honest and candor. I think you and I would skew more towards candor as our style. We're pretty direct guys. We tell people what we want. We're very far from, like, if you took the 0 on that would be a pussy. We
argued before this if we were allowed to say the word anymore, but clearly it's a cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a woke.
The cat's out of the pants.
Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna get canceled for saying that. But if you're a 0, you are just passive aggressive. You're weak. You can't tell anyone anything because of a fear of how they might respond. And on the other side, on like the 10, you're a jerk, and you are not only a jerk, you're almost a psychopath. As someone who literally says everything on their mind would probably be considered someone that has a mental derangement, wouldn't they? If you literally said every single thing that came into your mind.
Yeah, you're probably in solitary confinement somewhere. I don't think anybody who's a functioning member of society can be a 0 or a 10. Even in rare flare-ups, I don't think you can go to either. I think the continuum goes, you might go to 7, 8 on the right, 1, 2, 3 on the left, but you're probably not living in 0 or 10 because you're just an insufferable prick, or you're such a wimp, you can do neither. So it's one of those things. Now, we're going to get to this. You are probably a 10 if you're under the age of 5 or over the age of 80. So we're going to talk about like the difference in
this does not make a 6-year-old a prick for being candid and just not having any emotional intelligence yet. That's right.
And by 6, you're starting to get a clue because you got in wrist slapping a couple times. But like my 2-year-old has no idea when he can't say something.
Very nice kid. He just doesn't know any better yet.
Exactly.
And when you said it flares up, like, are you saying like candor can just kind of flare up?
Yeah, like if you're, let's just say you're really pissed off, you're really passionate about something, or you've been suppressing something forever. And then finally it's like, I am going to just unload on you. Like that's a flare up. That's like a bomb going off.
So candor's like hemorrhoids. They kind of come and go. You get a little flare up.
Yeah.
Then they go away. Things are okay.
It's kind of like IBS after you drink all of these margaritas.
There'll be no dairy products in my margarita.
Correct.
So first point we're going to talk about in both books, they say some form of the same thing, which is lying is a primary cause of suffering. And Kim Scott in Radical Candor, she has a great example that she uses, which is kind of the intro and the base to the book. She was stagnating in her career, and she, in a regular basis, had to speak at meetings, present, and she couldn't stop saying and she said it so much. She said it every third word. And an executive pulled her aside, and it was a female executive, pulled her aside and said, I'm a big fan of yours, Kim, but when you are presenting and you say every other word, it makes you sound stupid. And Kim talks about this in a way that the way she delivered it was perfect. And her model is when you're giving feedback that's very candid, that you should talk about the situation, which is when you are presenting. You should talk about the behavior. You say every other word, that's the behavior, and then the impact. And that is, it makes you sound stupid. Now, she is talking about her perception as an executive. I feel like you sound stupid. And the reason why Kim says that was very effective feedback for her is this person cared. So it started off where this executive cared about her enough to actually give her the feedback, to pull her aside. It didn't feel like she was saying, you're embarrassing me as your manager by doing that. She was saying, I care about your career and I want to try to help you here. But the fact that she said, it makes you sound stupid, if she would have said, try cutting out so many ums, Kim Scott said it wouldn't have been effective feedback for her. She would have thought about it. But
It's funny.
Every time she spoke from then on out, she said she thought about, I don't want to sound stupid, so I better not say that word. And it really made her think and cut out that word when she spoke.
George Carlin has a skit from the 90s, and it's just incredible. And I just thought of it. We didn't talk about this, but one of the things he talks about is how like shell shock became post-traumatic stress syndrome. And he goes through like all these different things that are in the lexicon and how we've pussified all these words, and we've taken them from shell shock to something that means so much less, and it's watered down. And you're kind of making yourself feel better for what you put a veteran through in the war. And his whole psychology around it is, if it was just called shell shock, people might pay more attention to it. Now it's PTSD and all this other crap. So the point I think that Kim's driving at, what George Carlin does, what George Carlin does in a really, really unique way, is he puts humor around. Sometimes you need to get punched in the face. And what she did, I want to say this too. We did an episode not too long ago about how to give proper feedback. This manager gave her the feedback sandwich. I'm a big fan. I'm ingratiating myself to you. You sound stupid. Not you are stupid. In this instance, you sound stupid. Very specific
situation, very specific situation and behavior.
And on the way out, there was probably a good close around it, and that's why it was so impactful. It was interpreted. So this is under a kind of a headline of lying, right? Is how we're kind of attacking this. And there's a couple of quotes we can finish with, but I think there's two things. Someone could lie to you, and this person did not lie to Kim. Or you can lie to yourself. And when I was prepping for this, what I thought about is radical honesty meant something to me because I didn't have the skill set at a point in my life. I started dating an incredible woman when I was in my high 20s. I was 27, and we ended up dating for 8 years. I knew 10 months in one specific moment, it was over. And sadly, I didn't have the skill set, the ability, the want to confront it. I felt so uncomfortable in that period. I just lived in a relationship that was wrong for another 7 years. I wasted, I mean, I'm 35 when this happened, when I break up with this person. That's 20% of, it's a big part of my life. And it's 20% of my life that had gone to the wrong relationships. I didn't have the ability to want to speak up. And what I learned in that moment is I probably could have done better things for myself had I had the courage to speak up. And not only that, pick your spots when you can appropriately give feedback, that you could be the person who gives the feedback to Kim if you're qualified, but you have to pick your spots.
And I think when you talk about caring, I think sharing in that moment. So Kim could have come to her boss and said, "How'd you think I did?" And she could have passed on saying anything.
Right.
She could have said, "Great job. Nice presentation. Let's move on to what's next." That executive had to force herself to be uncomfortable. I'm pretty good at telling people feedback real direct. If you ask, you need to be real careful when you ask me for feedback, because if you're asking me, I assume you want me to come real with you, but it's never gets easy for me. It's uncomfortable to call someone out. It's easier to say you did great and let me move on to the next to-do list on my item. To tell someone you sound stupid is not easy. That's never gets easy. And that, to me, that person cared a lot by doing it, and she told the truth. And there's a great quote from our guy Warren Buffett that Charlie Munger says all the time as well, which is, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember your lies. And I just love that. I love that quote. It's the more candid you can be with people, you don't have to go back and think about what did I say to them. You just you be as direct as you possibly can in talking to people.
Yeah, I mean, I learned that in several ways from both my parents and my football coach. You've got something interesting there about what you put in the notes about, when you get into fights with Jenny, it comes a lot from not chatting enough. I would love to have you talk a little bit about that.
Well, I've been married now nearly 20 years, and been in the same relationship with Jenny for more than half of my life now. So 23 years, I think. Whenever we get into some kind of a fight, it's just because we're both being a little passive aggressive. We're putting off something that the other person is doing that is hurting the other person's feelings, whether it's inadvertently or directly. We're just not sharing. Something I'm doing is annoying her, and she gets more and more distance from me until we get into an argument and a fight. And then we have to sit down and talk, absent the kids anywhere near. And kids make it even harder because you can't have those real conversations. They're always just hanging on you. They're always around. So almost every time we get in a fight, it always ends with, "Why didn't you just say this? Why didn't you just tell me this 3 weeks ago? Why can't just next time?" Like when we kiss and make up, it's always like, "Next time, can we just be more honest with each other? Can we just share more?" And there are just few times where I feel like we overshare with each other. Usually, we know a lot about each other, but most of our arguments just come from not talking enough and not saying that something the other person's doing is annoying us.
Well, I've been married a lot less time than you. I've been married, 1/5 as long. But what I can tell you is that I'm married to someone who, like, on the surface, if you don't know my wife, it's probably an odd pairing, right? She's a lot more liberal than I am. She's a professor, where I'm more of a capitalist, and we kind of butt heads with things. But one of the things that's incredible about her, and that I probably would not have found her, chosen her as a mate, had I not embraced some of these principles. She likes to duke it out, not in a way that's like yelling. She's smart, and she likes to debate and talk to a point where I'm exhausted sometimes. Or sometimes I come home from a long day at work and I don't want to get into that level of detail. But what I learned in the first relationship is I couldn't be honest, the one I referenced a minute ago. In this relationship, I'm forced to be honest because I married someone who forces me to talk way past my comfort zone. So what I think we're kind of getting for in this point is honesty is important. You can't be just like, do I look fat in this dress is a landmine you want to avoid. However, there are topics that you want to talk through. And the better you are capable of talking through things in a way that promotes a good conversation. This can be at work, this can be personal, it can be everywhere. You promote a good conversation, what ends up happening is you have a more rich relationship. And that is at the root of all this. You can go off the rails either way, but if you can have a good conversation, you can be truthful, but you can do it in a way that's sensible and you don't blow your audience out of the water, you can really have a rich relationship.
Your boy Blanton, he of many divorces,
long since dead.
he has a quote where he offers 0 sources, and it's, his radical opinion is not radical honesty, but his quote is 85% of relationships are pretty much more phony than authentic. Half or more of marriages split up, and more than half of those that do stay together suck. Now, I don't know how much field research your homie did in coming up with that, but there's some truth behind all of that. Not all of it is truth, but there are a lot of relationships that are just broken because they're more phony. People just choose not to have difficult and uncomfortable conversations. And in my opinion, at least, I'm far from perfect as a husband, but I think our relationship is very healthy and we've been together a long time. Jenny and I tend to be pretty candid with each other when someone is getting on the other's nerves.
Yeah. I feel like we've done a good job in communicating the point of this. It's just, if you're not honest with yourself, you don't speak up, it becomes more of a problem. Where if you deal with it in a way that's received, it becomes something that you can build off of versus avoid, which becomes a massive problem.
So you started with kids a little bit, but kids are way better at this than adults. And part of it is they're just not socially ingrained enough to understand what they can or can't say. But I think there are times where being almost childlike in your interpretations, childlike in your reactions to things you see can be helpful for people. So I have a few funny stories around this. One of my nieces, this is like 10 years ago. So I lost a tooth playing street hockey when I was younger, got a tooth knocked out, and it's on the bottom of my mouth. And this is like mid 90s, and the best dentist you could find in old Trenton, Michigan wasn't exactly cutting edge when it came to putting a bridge in. And so I got a bridge put in, so I had a tooth. It was permanent, but it had like a black metal like background on it. And so my tooth in the bottom, you could see that black coming through. So it almost made the tooth look black on the sides. But in my mind, I was kind of always like, no one could see the bottom of my mouth when I'm talking. So what's it matter? And almost nobody ever said a word about my tooth, right? So I went maybe 10 years with this crappy bridge. Everyone just didn't say anything. They were polite because what were they going to say? What was I going to do to change it? And one day I was talking to my niece, and she might've been 5 or 6. And she was like, "Uncle Ian, why do you have a black tooth?" And I was like, "What?" And I didn't say anything. And I'm like, "Oh, you're funny." And I went over to Jenny and I was like, "Do I have a black tooth?" She's like, "Yeah, you got a black tooth. Everyone knows you got a black tooth." I'm like, "What the hell? You haven't said anything." She's like, "You should get that fixed." And I'm like, "God damn it." Within a week, I had an appointment at her dentist. She had some, and I'm in there, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. Yeah, who did this?" I'm like, "Oh, he's in Trenton, Michigan." He's like, "All right, we got to fix this." So just hilarious though, that honest little girl was the only person that told me the truth, and it led to something great. I went and got a much better bridge. Now I don't have a black tooth. It matches the color of the rest of the teeth, and that's kind of kids. And another example that impacted my career, I was weighing, we've talked about this many times, but I was weighing whether to leave MBR. I was just unhappy. I wasn't enjoying it. And I had talked to you and a number of other friends outside of MBR. But one day I was driving in my car and my kids were in the back seat, and I heard them talking to each other, and it was Madison or IJ, one of the two just said, how come we have to ask dad the same question 5 times every time before he answers? And I picked up on that one, you know, I was ignoring the rest, but it impacted me really very strongly, Frank. And the reason why they had to ask me that many questions is I was so distracted. I had my company on my mind. I had the burdens of the job. I didn't like my job anymore. I didn't like my boss. I wasn't getting along with him. And so I was just distracted. I was never really there when I was with my kids. And that was a very candid question that they asked. That was, you know, in a sweet way. It wasn't hard, but it really kind of shook me a little bit and helped solidify a decision I was coming to anyway, but much faster, which was pretty much, Dad, you might be around, but you're really not around. You're really not around when we see you.
It's funny because we're talking about kids, but for me, I mentioned a minute ago, but I think the most honest answers you ever get are from kids under the age of 7 and adults over 80.
Mhm.
And one of the funny ones, like my kids are young, they say some crazy stuff, but they're mostly just repeating what we've said. So instead of, you know, perjuring myself, what I'll say is a funny story about my granddad, who he's almost like a cartoon character. And I had come home from the gym while we were all up there, and I was working out. I was, you know, in my late 30s. And he's like, you went to the gym, huh? I'm like, yeah. He's like, you go often? I'm like, yeah, I go as much as I can, you know, 5 or 6 days a week. You know, I'm in pretty good shape. And he's like, I've seen you thinner. Granted, he's sitting on a lazy boy. He's got diabetes. He's 50 pounds overweight. And he calls me out on it.
It is amazing. It is amazing. And you can't get mad at that because you just know
He's right.
He's correct. It's an unfettered answer. You'd probably been eating, you know, grandma's meatballs for 6 days. You were probably 15 pounds heavier in water weight than normal. But it was
no doubt.
That probably had your ass eating salads for a couple of months when you got home. Because grandparents are pretty honest. Like,
it's incredible.
You've been thinner. It's amazing. So in the book, Radical Candor, Kim Scott says that you got to have 2 things to be radically candid. You have to show that you care personally, and you have to challenge directly. So someone who's being radically candid has shown they care personally, and they will challenge you directly. If you don't do that, there's 3 other approaches. There's you care, but you don't challenge. And that's kind of, she calls that ruinous empathy. You challenge indirectly and you don't care. So that to me is manipulation. That's passive aggressiveness, which I think we need to spend a lot of time talking. I think just about everyone hates a passive aggressive person. And then there's challenging directly without caring. That's just obnoxious aggression. So I kind of like the way she thinks of that you've got to care and you have to challenge if you want to be a good boss. You can't have one or the other, and you definitely can't miss both. So, you know, Frank, one thing that we talked about is you've got to, you know, to be radically honest, you're noticing, you're reporting what you notice, you're acknowledging these things, as you experience things, you don't let them just come and go and then come back. You are just addressing things as you go. But I think emotional intelligence is critical in this. I think someone without any emotional intelligence could really screw this up if they were just trying to be radically candid all the time. I think that concept could make people start to hate you, or it could get very awkward. I don't know. I think without emotional intelligence, none of this works.
So one of the things that we've talked about in prior episodes, and we quoted the Pope, who's the only person we could see came up with this. I learned this from one of my first managers, and he said he learned it from one of his kindergarten teachers. See everything, forgive a lot, fix a little. That is management summed up very, very neatly. And what you need to realize, am I just being an asshole? or am I going to make an impact and make things different? So I can think of tons of examples of this over 20 plus year career where you can come in and you can lacerate someone. You can just give them tons and tons of stuff. Now, if you do that, you can burn the person out, you can turn the person over, you could cripple any initiative they ever had, because you're basically doing what happened to Kim Scott. You're just saying you sound like an idiot or you sound stupid without the I like you a lot or I care about you. You're not qualifying it, you're just being the jerk. So if you do not want to be alone in life, you need to come at these things with some sense and some smarts and think about what you hope to get out of it. Let's say you've interviewed someone, you bring them in, and 3 months in, you want to have this conversation. You're an idiot. So who's the idiot? You interviewed them, you tested them, you hired them. Are they the idiot or are you the idiot? So what I have noticed is it's usually a little bit of both. So no emotional intelligence is just blast them. Emotional intelligence is, look, I feel like most of the things you're doing are really good. There's some fall down items here. We really need to fix these. In the broader context, we've got a lot of work to do, but if we can fix these few things, I think we can get a lot better and we can have some momentum and we can move in the right direction. And if we do that, I think you're going to start to feel better and achieve, and we can really grow. And we had a conversation with someone, not too long ago, with a performance management conversation, and that's the conversation. It's like, well, we either fire the person or we don't. And I led the meeting with, I'm not firing you. We're going to write these things down and go through them because I want to see you get better.
I think an important piece here on feedback, Frank, that really isn't addressed in either of the books is the difference between a lacking skill or lacking talent.
Yeah.
Those two things are very big. And so a simple example would be if you're coaching youth baseball players and you have a kid who's just not fast and he gets thrown out at second, hustling his butt off, but he gets thrown out on a play that all other 8 kids on your lineup would have made it into second. I think the last thing you do is pull them aside and say, you got to get faster. When I watch you run the bases, I want to close my eyes and not watch because you're so slow. There's no advantage. Like, that's the truth. That's the honest truth. But what can he do about it? He's slow. That's genetics. That's picking on a kid because he doesn't throw hard enough, or he doesn't. There are certain things that just they can't do versus a skill. So let's say he got picked off at first because he wasn't paying attention. He was looking out into left field and not paying attention. Now that's an area where you can coach. That's a skill. That's a skill, paying attention. Hey, you got to be on the base until he steps on the rubber, and all you're looking at is his front leg, nothing else in the park. And if you can't get better at that, you can't bat in my lineup in tournaments because I can't have someone who hits good but gets picked off all the time. That's radical candor. That's a skill that you can coach a little, you can give them some knowledge, and you can let them know a few ramifications, but it's not a talent that he's lacking. And I think it's the same in business. I think it's some people just are not built for certain tasks. There's no point in writing them all the time. You hired them knowing some of their strengths and weaknesses. Focus on their strengths, focus on the areas where you can build, and the stuff that they're just not good at,
manage around it.
Leave it alone and manage around it. Don't keep pushing them on their weaknesses when we're kind of who we are by the time we're 20 years old.
So a few things, right? In baseball, they have something called a pinch runner. The reason you have a pinch runner is because if your catcher gets on and you need to score, you pull the guy out of the game and you have someone who goes faster in there. That's the best use of it. But let's talk about the kid who got picked off on first in your example.
You're hitting close to home on that one, buddy. You're hitting close.
Oh, if there was anybody who's been pitch run for, it's the two of us. So the other piece of it is this: the kid getting picked off of first base. That kid who got picked off on first base could be driving the car and have their daughter safe in the back seat. How come we have to ask dad the same question 5 times before he answers? It's called having a lapse in attention. It's called having other things on your mind. It's called not being present. I'm guilty of it during this podcast. Like, that's what happens. Things come into your head. So that is something you can say, I need to make you aware of this. You shouldn't have gotten picked off of first base because you weren't looking. But let me give you a hint or a clue. It's going to happen again. It's going to happen when you're an adult. It's going to happen in a conversation with your wife. It's going to happen in an interview. It happens. Things come into your head. So, hey, you're on first base. You got picked off. You and I both know you're better than that. You and I both know you weren't paying attention. You weren't in the moment. Correct? Yeah. All right. Let's pay attention. Let's stay focused. Give him a pat on the shoulder. Get back in the dugout. That's part of life. And if you are going to just condemn a kid for getting picked off at first, you're lying. You're lying to yourself, because it happens to all of us. Unless it's your son. And then if that ever happens again and your head is so far up your ass, I will never play you again. It is a different story. That's it. That's all I'm going to say. Fair point. IJ cannot get picked off. As a manager, if you're a manager, one thing I find is sharing honestly. If you don't share honestly in something that is really impacting your business, really impacting the team with someone, it's kind of like pressure building up in a pipe. There's pressure release valves in pipes for a reason, because if the pressure builds too much, the pipe explodes. And the same thing happens with managers. If you're not good at this, it's sharing, I'm frustrated and here's why. If you can't get good at that, what happens is when you see managers who yell, who have outbursts, that get emotional in the office, it's because they're not terribly good at being candid on a regular basis in the right way that's constructive. And so they let this pile of issues build up with someone without sharing it with them, and that employee doesn't know that pressure's building up in their manager until one day where they just lose it. And I talk about this all the time. When I start having those imaginary conversations in the shower with people, I've let something gone on way too long. And you've talked about being at bath time with Max and you're not present with him because you're thinking about someone at work that you're not addressing. And I think radical candor, whether you however you define it, I think it's healthy for you as the manager, and I think it's healthy for the employee, because that employee ends up having this really ugly conversation with you that could have been a string of more congenial conversations with you, and you are letting all this stress and pressure build up inside of you and impact your personal life, impact your health. All of those things are impacted when you can't learn how to be honest with someone if they're doing something that is driving you nuts. So I was a young manager and I took a training class. And the way this was taught to me, it was taught to me in a term called collecting stamps. And collecting stamps is the equivalent of letting steam build up in the pipe, and then it blows up. What I have learned, and what's most effective for me and with people I've worked with, is think of these two different examples. Hey, Ian, great job with this, this, and this. I saw this one item. I think you could do a little bit better with it, but overall, great job today. One little piece of feedback, done, real time, over. You see it again and again, you can address it again and again, but most of the times you give people a little bit of a nudge and it goes in the right direction. The opposite is, I saw Ian screw something up, and then I see something else a couple weeks later, a couple weeks later, a couple weeks later. You collect stamps, and then something happens, and you don't just have one thing to talk about. You've got 5 or 10 things to talk about. And you're like, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this. Think of the worst arguments you ever have. They usually have a list in there somewhere of all the things. Right. Another thing about you that drives me. And another thing, Vonnegut, like all these things over and over again, that's what happens. That's the stamp collecting. So if you are able to just be honest in the moment, give feedback in the moment, talk about it in the moment, most people like little bits of nudging and coaching. That's perfect. And then when you do have something that's big, you don't have all this other baggage. You can just deal with the big item. And I don't think every time you give someone tough feedback, it needs to have 4 positives. No, no, of course
Hey,
not.
That's the third sales meeting in a row you showed up 5 minutes late to. When you do that, you show everyone else on the team that you don't care about their time and that you're not serious about working here. Change it. That's it. That's radically candid. You're pissing me off. You're being a bad teammate. I don't need to say you're a great employee in the beginning. I don't need to say here's three things you're doing. You were late 3 times. That's rude. Fix it.
What I'm saying here, Ian, is this. Most instances you can get away with, there's usually some positive that goes around with something, and then it's a lot of positive with a little something that needs to be adjusted. However, if someone is an asshole, if someone's late, if someone needs something, you don't need to qualify that, because most of the time you give feedback, you give positive stuff with a few things. You've earned the right and built up the trust where if you're late 3 times, when I confront someone and say, people think you're being a jerk, this is happening, you're not doing this, they usually look at me and go, you're right, I'm sorry, thank you for the feedback. But that's all part of it.
Something important. You are in the right. So for me, yes, praise more than give negative feedback. Praise more. Where you and I often disagree on this is, I think you praise someone every day, you're going through all of it, you're just always praising. When it's time for me to give negative feedback, I'm not a fan of mixing in a bunch of cookies.
Yeah.
If I'm giving you tough feedback, it's because all the time I'm giving you positive feedback, but that's not with this conversation. So Kim Scott's manager didn't call her in and say, man, really great job bringing in that client last week. And I think you did an excellent job in working with that employee that you hired. And then, oh, by the way, don't say, because it makes you sound stupid. And then here's 3 other, it wouldn't have been as impactful to her in that moment than a conversation of, look, this conversation is going to be very direct and it's something I want you to fix. But I had 9 other conversations with you in the last 2 weeks that were very positive. So I think I'm saying the same thing as you, where I think we disagree. I don't mix them in the same conversation. When it's like a tough conversation with radical candor, it's just that.
We're actually
leave an impression on you.
We're articulating it in different ways. We're saying something similar. What I'm saying is, most of the time that you manage people, there's usually a lot of positive, but there's usually a thing or two you can fix in the course of day-to-day life and management. However, if there's a big item, I don't come in and say, hey, you're doing these 7 things great, but we're putting you on performance management. Then it's like, you're in here because these things aren't working. Don't you agree? That's when you must be incredibly staunch in what you're saying, and needs to be delivered from a place of incredible power and certainty, because it's not going to land otherwise. If you're a pussy in that moment, they are not going to hear the message, and it's on you as the manager because you don't have the courage.
That's right. And when I think staunch, I think Frank Cava every time. I don't think of anything else when I hear that word. So we've talked about dealing with other people. We've talked about dealing in relationships, with being direct with other people. I think where radical honesty comes into play more than anywhere is leaning into discomfort with yourself, because the person you lie to more than anyone in your life is yourself. And if you can't force conflict with yourself, you can't really get better, because cognitive dissonance is such a powerful process in the brain that you end up lying to yourself all the time on what you believe and what your actions are, and you come up with really great reasons why you can't move forward in certain areas.
Yeah, the self-handicapping aspect of this comes up, right? Like a lot of this is, what lies are we telling ourselves? And when we were coming up with a list, like for me, it's like, my diet will start tomorrow, or I can eat this and I'm not breaking my diet, or like little things like that. It's just, you're constantly in that self-handicapping. You're not holding yourself accountable, and you're lying to yourself. And I don't know, when I learned, it's funny, and I don't know if you've ever dealt with this, but if I'm like really honest with someone in an email or something, I don't always want to read the response. Like, I know that I need to be strong in how I send the email, but then I know that email's in there and I'm like, I kind of want to avoid it, because I've moved past the moment. And then it's like, I gotta go deal with this.
I 100% feel that. I do not like getting replies when I've worded something, and I will leave it in my inbox for a week and not even open it. Like if
I'm the same way.
I never wrote it in the first place. Sometimes I'll even delete it without reading the response.
You know what I'll do sometimes? I'll ask one of the people who monitors my email. I'm like, hey, so-and-so sent me an email. How was it? What were the highlights?
You don't want to
delete it.
You don't want to read it. That's absolutely hilarious. And it's just easy to lie to yourself. David and I at Keep with our car alarm company, we about 2 months ago, we just came to a conclusion. We were racing to hit this arbitrary date at the end of the year when we would have production units. And we kept making these little sacrifices here and there and compromising all over the place until one day we were just talking and we're like, we're racing to ship a crappy product. This isn't even the product we're proud of or we like. We've compromised so much. We had to start by being honest with ourselves. That wasn't someone from outside the company saying this product sucked. It was, we needed to come internally and say, we're not proud of the product we're making right now. Let's pause. What resources do we need? We've beefed up our engineering team. Things are different now, but I think the most insidious lies we tell are normally to ourselves. So
okay, hold on. But before we get into this, let's. I think this is relevant. I think we should stay here for just a second, and this is why. I think that moment of we're not building the product we want, and having a moment of truth there. I think that's clearly it's something where you didn't let yourself lie or go down the wrong path. But I think this is more important. It's also part of the process. Like you have to do that. A Ring doorbell. I bet they had the same moment. Anything that's ever been built, there's always had to be that ripcord pulled of nope, wrong direction, don't like it. That has to but the other thing is, Ian, as you go into this, like if David is really honest, this is like the 4 things he's invented. I will bet you if he goes back and looks at revisionist history of all 4 products, there was a moment of, I'm heading down the wrong road. We got to pull this back. And then you start to, the whole reason we're having this podcast is you're going to see these forks. Can you identify it before you've gone too far down the road?
Well, in a startup in general, Frank, you're limited on your money. Every month we're burning $100,000 plus in salaries and expenses building this product, and we raised $4 million. So it goes to say that if we wait long enough, we will run out of money, and it will be much harder to go get money from people a second time if we don't have a product. So in general, a startup culture is going to be much better at radical candor than a big company where you're not running out of money. You're just trying to protect egos. With us, if you're not radically candid, so any idea, an engineer comes up with an idea, let's use this component. I've tested it. I think it works. If another engineer comes up with a better component, a better idea, he is supposed to challenge the other engineer. And what I found is, at least in a startup, engineers don't take it as personal as people in other companies might, because engineers are wired to find the best answer, to find the best path.
Yep.
So
they're not
on
emotional.
a daily basis, we get on these scrum calls and I just hear people not arguing, but saying, I think a different path is there. And you can't get wedded to your ideas. You can't, you have to be open to having your ideas challenged in a startup. That's the process of iteration.
Agreed. So I think what we're going to get into now, I'll tee it up. So what we're going to get into now is we were kind of going through like things you just can't say. And then we kind of got into we were joking about, just crazy shit that could come out of someone's mouth. And we're like, all right, we're going to go liar on you. We're going to go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum and just say, there's different things you deal with in a day-to-day of a business or being a normal human being. And here are the things you absolutely can't have come out of your mouth.
Yep. So here's our top 10 times not to be radically candid. So these are things that we've not said and you shouldn't say. Number 1 was, my boss hates you. I've had many of these circumstances where someone who reported to me that I thought highly of was not on my boss's list of people that was getting a Christmas card. And for very personal, silly reasons in my mind, but I would never be radically candid about that. I would say something like, look, you've got a lot of work to do before you've earned Bill's trust. Knowing in the back of my head, Bill hated this person and was never going to like them because Bill was stubborn, right? And you can't tell that person, my boss hates you. You have to say something a little softer if you don't want them to quit, because they'll quit. No, if you know the boss of the company hates you, you're not going to stay. So you have to soften that. You have to say it a little bit different.
And I think the thing you have to ask yourself as the manager is, do I hate this person or is it just my boss? And is my boss wrong? And if my boss is wrong and there's value in you, then you shield that person. But we talked as well about, if I hate you and my boss hates you, we probably need to get you out of here.
A little different, but bosses come and go, right? So my boss is gone at a different time, and I respect this person, so maybe it won't be an issue at some point.
That's exactly right, because when that person moved on, you have the person underneath you that you can do things with it. We all have different opinions. Another one is, you've reached the ceiling. You don't want to say to someone you've reached a ceiling unless you want that person to quit, or you want to hasten an exit. Everyone has a ceiling. Sadly, even Ian and me, as hard as it is for us to admit it out loud. However,
once we opened this podcast up, we showed everyone our ceiling.
Exactly. But you can't say that to someone unless you want to turn them over, like I said. So what you have to do in that instance is you have to navigate around it. What I have dealt with, I don't want you to be here because you're past your ceiling. I'm incredibly honest. And I usually lead with, you and I both know this isn't working out. We've talked about that before, because that's the ceiling. It's like, you're not in the spot where it's best for you, and this just can't work.
But there's good people. So that's a person you want to leave.
Yeah.
If it's a person I wanted to leave, I would tell them you've reached the ceiling. Go ahead and leave. Let's say it's a person that I think is really strong, who thinks they deserve to be promoted, who I know is not capable of it. And in my viewpoint, I've seen enough to know you can't move higher in this organization. If I like that person and I want them to stay in the company, I'm not going to tell them they've reached a ceiling. I'm going to be very specific in the areas they need to get better, knowing damn well they just can't. And they're wrong, right, or indifferent. There are people that I've made my mind up. That's about as high as you can go in this organization. But I'll never say that to you. I'll never say you've reached the ceiling in my mind. I'll just say, these are the areas where you need to get better.
So the next one is, my boss is wrong, but I have no influence with him. So if you say that out loud, the problem that you're running into is that you lose credibility with people that you work with. They're not going to believe you or trust you or listen to you if you say you don't have any influence. So what I have noticed for managers is that in some instances they have the influence, or they give the perception that they have the influence, and they certainly have more influence than you have as the person who's being managed. And I think, Ian, you did a great job of that, like the way that you came in NVR, and we've talked about it before, of how you presented at the annual meetings and you did all these things. You made it seem to all of us that you had these incredible relationships with people, in many instances that you didn't, because you took initiative to control the frame and the narrative. And you can do this in an incredible way. And the other thing I think is important to say, these things are moments in time. I might not have the influence with my boss today, but in 6 months, I might earn it. And if you let that toothpaste out of the tube, you can't put it back in. So you're really doing yourself a disservice by saying that.
Number 4, what do you mean you're pregnant? Every single time anyone has ever told me they were pregnant, I have said the same thing. I'm so happy for you. That is amazing. I give them a little hug and I say, great job. You're going to just love being a mom. But in the back of your mind, you are melting. You are freaking out. You are like, all you can think about is, how are we going to replace you? How am I going to live without you for 2 months? How in the hell am I going to do my job and yours at the same time? Anytime anyone's ever said they were pregnant, I have gone into immediate panic mode about how badly it was going to impact me. But you can't be radically candid in that moment. You also can't be radically candid when a guy comes to you and says they plan on taking 3 weeks of paternity leave. Because what I would like to say to you when you say that is, wow, that's great. I took 2 days. That's interesting though. Okay, enjoy your 3 weeks. All you're thinking about is, what are the laws and what am I not allowed to say? But that's a time where my mind really shouldn't be as candid as it wants to be in that moment.
The next one is, Ian, you're the reason I hate casual Fridays. Before this podcast started, Ian was wearing a fishnet shirt.
Oh, let's be real. There are just some people that don't look good in jeans on Friday. I hated jeans Friday. I was against it for years. I wouldn't let people wear jeans on Friday. And it's because I would just see the people walking around in the office with the kind of jeans that they brought in. And I was like, damn, because our people saw customers. And I'd be like, there were too many guidelines around what kind of casual clothes you could wear. And I just always hated casual Fridays.
The best example of this I could give you is, I used to love Sex and the City. My wife and I have watched that several times, and there was a casual Friday where like it was a homosexual guy, and he literally wore like a see-through like plastic shirt. It was like something like you can't do it at a gay bar in San Francisco, let alone at a law office in New York.
Yes. So this one, let's say we've got an employee, 1 of 10 doing the same job. The other 9 are getting their job done in their 40 hours a week. And this person's always behind and complaining to you. What you would like to say is, I'm sorry you're behind. What have you been doing with your Saturdays? I would love to say that, because Frank and I are the kind of people that would just come in on a Saturday if we were behind. We don't feel too terrible for you that you can't get the work done that your peers are doing. So why don't you work on the Saturday, you lazy turd? But we don't say that.
What's funny to me, and as a young professional person, I wasn't a manager yet, there was a woman who was in the settlement office in our Ryan Home South office, and she was always in there on Saturdays and Sundays. And I thought she was incredible. We hired this young woman, she's low to mid 20s, and she was like playing like Brick Breaker on her computer, like Monday through Friday. And what I realized was, wow, this other girl is way smarter than that last person and can get so much more done. She wasn't in there over the weekends because she didn't need to be, because she could get the job done. So here's the next one. Ian, I only keep you on this podcast because of your personality.
That wouldn't hurt my feelings. You could actually say that. Personality is a skill when it comes to podcasting, for sure.
For sure.
But I think in an office setting,
Yes,
there are a lot of people that just aren't real good at their job, but everyone likes them, and it just would be heartbreaking to fire them, and you know that. And you probably wouldn't be candid with that person and saying, you're not very talented, but we all seem to like you, so you keep a job.
I'm going to do the next one because you can do the one after that. If I had time to find someone better, you would have been gone a long time ago. You can't say that. There was a situation where I had a manager, and he wanted to demote one of our crews, like one of our 1099 crews. He wanted to take them off of single family homes and put them on rental homes, like for sale homes, and move them over. And he's like, I'm going to go tell them. I'm like, why? Like, he's like, well, their work isn't good enough. I'm like, okay, but you're just going to piss them off. Why don't you just tell them, hey, the next house available for you is this one, and never have that confrontation? Just give them a rental, like have some tact, because you may have to pull them back in, and then you're going to have completely just eviscerated them, where you could just say, hey, good job, we'll move you over here. Like, sometimes you got to be somewhat strategic.
I think 9 and 10 fall in the same category. So let's do them at the same time.
Go.
9 is we're running out of money. And 10 is, I'm not sure we're going to make it. And that's if you're an owner, a manager in an office that's already panicking.
Yeah. even if the office isn't panicking, like I started a business with very little and I've grown it. Like if you're not experiencing this as a leader, you're lying, but you don't share it. Even if everything's burning around you, you keep that shit to yourself, because that's what leadership is. And you hope you graduate to a point where you don't have these problems. But literally, I was watching a documentary with my wife a week or two ago on Bill Gates. And Bill Gates, like even after divorce, he'll be one of the 20 richest people in the world. But he's like the top 4th richest person in the world, something like that. And he said in the early days of Microsoft, all I wanted to do was save enough money where I could pay for payroll for 2 years. And like out of nowhere, my wife reached over and grabbed my hand and just held my hand. And she goes, "It's hard, isn't it?" I'm like, "Yeah." But that's real for anybody who's ever started a business. The thing you talked about, Ian, a second ago, you got 40 months worth of runway. You better build the damn product or you're going to be out of money. You're going to make a lot of bad phone calls. So pressure is part of this. But the thing is you have that conversation with your friend Ian on a Saturday when you're walking around. You don't say that on the team call, because that's how you kill morale.
That's right. So Frank, we have 1 minute to wrap this up because I'm going for margaritas. So I will leave everyone with the most candid, best conversation I had for my career that really helped me. We were going through a executive like training program. Our top 10 executives are going through it, and our CEO took me out to lunch. And this is the guy who he recruited me into the company. I'd known him for 6-7 years, and I'm a competitive guy. And he cut right to the chase. He said, "Everything is win-loss to you, Ian. You're so competitive. You take everything personal. And in your mind, you have an incredible winning percentage. But to everyone else in this company, you're a bull in a china shop. You think only in terms of how Ian and his team can win every single dialogue, and you intimidate everybody, and they feel like they're losing." And I don't think that way. I'm a CEO. My job is to think, how does the company win always? What's the best answer? Not what's the best idea that came from me. You need to learn how to think in terms of how the company wins. Just because you and your team are winning doesn't mean everyone else doesn't think you're an asshole. He said it that direct. It was perfect feedback, and it changed me. It was a perfect situation, behavior,
impact.
And he nailed it. And I left that lunch thinking, I need to change. It was impactful.
Ian, I'll say this, you son of a bitch. I love you, brother. Happy birthday.
Hey, that's great radical candor, man. Thank you. I appreciate you, buddy. I'm going to go get my margaritas.
Enjoy. Go get your load on, pal.
See ya, dude.
See ya.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.